Good evening. My name is Gary Sanders, and welcome to part one of our series of interviews with the Democratic candidates for president. My guest tonight is Congressman Dennis Kucinich of Cleveland, who is co-chairman of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Congressman Kucinich, a writer recently in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, your hometown newspaper, has said of your candidacy, quote, "He's a dark horse, so far back in the gloom that he's hardly visible," unquote. With this already crowded field of candidates, why have you decided to run for president?
Well, I know there are people who feel it would be a cold day in hell and a lot of snow before an FDR-type Democrat would have a shot at the White House, but if you check your weather map, we've had some unusual weather lately. And I think that my candidacy, which is really aimed at being responsive to the needs of working men and women, trying to get them to have a government they can call their own, trying to make it possible for people to be able to protect their jobs and their wages, their benefits, their whole standard of living. I think that's going to strike a responsive chord among Americans. And at a time when our country's obsessed with going to war, where our leaders are beating the drums for war, I think Americans are looking for leadership which can bring about peace and also security and prosperity, and that's the direction I intend to take in this campaign.
Well, most recently, you've been in the news because you were one of 6 congressmen who went into federal court on February 13th in an attempt to prevent the president from launching this invasion of Iraq. What motivated you to do that?
To protect the lives of American servicemen and servicewomen who are about to be called into battle, a battle that has not been sanctioned by the Congress of the United States. The founders of this country made it very clear that only Congress, and Congress alone, has the power to declare war. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the United States makes it very clear that Congress must take the responsibility, that no president can lead this country into war. Our founders wrote the Constitution specifically with that in mind. So now we're in federal court to insist that the Constitution protect this nation as a president would lead us into war.
Mm-hmm. And we are taping this on February 16th. When do you think we're going to get some sort of decision in the federal court?
I don't know when the federal court will decide, but I do know this. They're all across this country. There are Americans who are looking for diplomacy as opposed to war, who are looking for the administration to take a view of a world as interconnected and interdependent, where war is not necessary. Now, we have a right to defend ourselves as a nation. Absolutely, we must defend ourselves. However, Iraq was not involved in 9/11 and Al-Qaeda's role in 9/11 and the anthrax attack on our country. Iraq doesn't have the ability to strike at this country with its weapons. It doesn't have weapons of mass destruction to the extent that they're usable according to the UN. UN hasn't found anything yet. We need inspections. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure the UN stays in there. But what we don't need is a war at great cost to the men and women who serve, and, I might say, at the loss of millions and millions of lives.
Now, last October, you were one of the congressmen and senators who voted against the joint resolution to authorize the use of military force against Iraq. Do you not think that that resolution is going to give Bush a carte blanche to do what he wants here?
No president can ignore the Constitution of the United States. It's very important that President Bush understand that our Constitution, while it declares that he's the commander-in-chief, reserves to Congress the right to declare war. And so before he commits American troops to battle, I'm hopeful that there'll be another vote in the Congress to enable us to assert our constitutional responsibility. And I hope that we pursue a path, such as been suggested by Germany and France and China and Russia, to avert war. War is not necessary here. This can be solved with diplomacy if that is the will of the administration.
Do you think these hundreds of thousands, actually millions of people around the world who were in peace demonstrations this weekend is going to have any effect at all on the administration and their course here?
I would hope it does. When you think about it, the administration ought to be listening to the voices of people around America and around the world who are saying that war is not inevitable, that peace is inevitable if we're willing to commit ourselves to diplomacy, which involves inspections and an approach which seeks to reintegrate Iraq into the world community. It's important to listen to people. I spoke in New York City to hundreds of thousands of people on First Avenue, and the crowd was interested in peace, in security for America, but peace.
What if the United Nations, which at the present time does not seem like it's going to pass a resolution to authorize war against Iraq, what if in the next month they decide with France going along with it that they will pass a resolution to enable us to invade Iraq? What would be your position then?
Well, first of all, with France and Germany, Russia and China indicating that they have grave reservations about the United States' intended course of action, I think that it's unlikely that the United Nations Security Council would take the steps to authorize a war against Iraq. However, if the United Nations determines to do that, it would only be because they were dragged into it by the United States. And under those circumstances, I am not prepared to approve of any kind of action, because the United Nations would be ruined if it was pulled into a war by the most powerful nation in the world. We need to protect the United Nations and let its process work without this overwhelming influence of the United States and this administration to try to trigger a war against Iraq.
What about those who say that Saddam Hussein is like Hitler, that we have to stop him or he's going to destroy not only his own country but others in the Persian Gulf, and he's already gassing his own people? What about those people who say that he must be stopped?
Well, it is interesting to hear that being said by some of the same people who were supporting policies which enabled Saddam Hussein to gain biological and chemical weapon stocks years ago. Where do you think those biological and chemical weapon capabilities came from? They came from American corporations who were encouraged by previous administrations who now have some of their ranks included in the leadership of this country. So please, Saddam Hussein has been contained. He can continue to be contained successfully. The inspections that the United Nations conducted over a period of 7 years worked. They disarmed Hussein. They kept him from moving forward with any plans that he could have. I think it's important for us to recognize that what this administration wants is not disarmament. They want regime change, and they want regime change not because simply they don't like Saddam Hussein, because Secretary Rumsfeld sat down with Hussein years ago. They want regime change so they can control the oil in the region. Now, everybody knows that. That is not even a kept secret anymore.
Well, all right. Now, obviously, this is February, and we've got a long way to go in this presidential campaign. Is there any way that this is not going to be the dominant issue of the next year and a half? Is there some way you see this peacefully resolved?
The administration has set a tone here which will probably make their foreign policy an issue from now until kingdom come, because they're talking about a nuclear posture review which involves the first use of nuclear weapons. I mean, imagine that. In a world where we're supposed to be committed to nuclear disarmament, a United States administration saying it's okay to use nuclear weapons. They're committed to a national security strategy which involves unilateralism and preemption in a world where nations are trying to get along. So that's going to continue to be at issue, because it's not just about Iraq, this is about Iran, this is about North Korea, this is about perhaps Syria and Libya. This administration needs to be called to an accounting for its foreign policy, but keep in mind, this is not only about foreign policy, it's about domestic policy, because war with Iraq would cost a minimum of $200 billion. and it could cost over $1 trillion. And when you keep in mind the pressing needs of this country for health care, for retirement security, for housing, for being able to sustain the American people and their quality of life, you realize that this war will be devastating to the economy. So this election is not only about foreign policy, it is about domestic policy, it is about universal health care, Medicare for all, it's about preserving Social Security, it is about a full employment economy, and I'll tell you another thing it's about. It's about looking at all these trade laws that have resulted in a massive loss of American jobs. We need to take another look at NAFTA and at the WTO. And if I proceed in this campaign to the second step of the campaign, which is a formal announcement in June, I intend to make a centerpiece of my campaign the repeal of NAFTA. It has cost the American workers dearly, and we have given up our rights. We've given up workers' rights and environmental rights and human rights. We've given up the ability to control our own destiny. And I think if one thing about this country is important, it's that we control our own economic destiny. And so in this campaign, I'm going to be talking about not only foreign policy, but economic issues and trade issues that affect our domestic economy.
So you would expect, I assume, from what you said about repealing NAFTA, that labor would be one of your strong constituents.
I'm not a missionary here.
Mm-hmm.
I come from labor.
Mm-hmm.
I carry a card in the AFL-CIO, the IATSE Local 600.
Which is stagehands,
It's
correct?
the movie, it's the union that makes the movies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the cameramen, it's the stagehands, it's the people that are very creative in the entertainment industry. And I've been involved in that for about 9 years. Television productions, things like that. That's kind of what I've worked on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that my connection to working people, the experience that I've had of a lifetime, has put me in a position where I understand people's practical aspirations, what people's concerns are.
Your father was a truck driver, isn't
My
he?
father drove a truck for 35 years. He raised, with my mother, raised a family of 7 children. And, you know, you find, as the poet Langston Hughes said, that, you know, life is no crystal staircase. You know, there's ups and downs.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you have a job, there's illness, there's difficulties. You have an expanded family. I mean, in those days, it was difficult to be able to find housing. You find out what it's like for people to have to make ends meet, and often falling short of that every day. That was my experience growing up in the inner city in Cleveland. And if you want to know anything about me at all, it's that I remember where I came from. And where I came from really instructs the policies and the positions that I take, not only as a member of Congress, but will have a lot to say about where I hope to take this country as I continue to explore a candidacy for President of the United States.
Is it true that you were homeless part of the time as a child?
Sure. I mean, by the time I was 17,
Mm-hmm.
we lived in 21 different places, including a couple cars. Now, I know, you know, that's nothing that's new for some people in America because there's a lot of homeless people in America. But what that taught me was, first of all, that people might have it rough. That even if you have a job, there might be difficulties. That it's important to remember the poor.
Do you think President Bush understands this at all?
I think each one of us is given the benefit of experiences that we can share with the nation, and in doing so, we can affirm our own humanity. I think each one of us has experiences which point out what we might bring to public office, and each one of us has credits that might help credit the nation. So I'm hopeful that my life experience, which I'll be sharing with this nation in the course of this campaign, is one that will show a sympathy with the poor, with working men and women, with middle-class people who are trying to hold on to their homes. Because I think a nation ought to be about their dreams as well. Not just about the dreams of those at the top of the economic ladder, but the dreams of people who are just trying to hold on and trying to make a living. So I understand what it's like for people, and because of that, it's enabled me to be of service in public life.
So I assume you'd be in favor of raising the minimum wage?
Well, the minimum wage has to be raised. I mean, we have to actually talk in terms of a living wage.
Living wage.
Because right now, $5.15 an hour is very tough for people. That needs to go up at least $1, and it needs to be done in a period of 2 or 3 years. I think it's important for us to look at how we can restore the lost purchasing power of workers. Because what's happening, that even with wage increases, with inflation, people start falling back. Even with wage increases, I think we need to index the federal minimum wage to something that I would call productivity plus inflation, so that people who are low-wage workers get a chance to share in the wealth of the country. I think it's really important that an election and an administration is about lifting up people, about giving them a chance to share the wealth. People work hard. They work their whole lives just to have a home, to be able to send their children to college. I mean, why shouldn't they be able to have decent wages and benefits to secure that? That's why I'm in government. That's what I'm going to be talking about in this campaign.
What do you think about the mood of this country when we get President Bush with his tax cuts passing through Congress and people seemingly not rising up against this? Is there room for somebody like yourself who's running a progressive liberal campaign?
Well, is there room in America for the American dream anymore? I mean, that's inevitably what this discussion is going to be about. Is there room to talk about people at the top of the economic ladder paying a fair share of the taxes? I mean, there's a transfer of wealth going on in this society right now, and it's going on from the middle class to the wealthiest Americans. That tax cut accelerated the transfer of wealth. That tax cut was $1 trillion tax cut, most of which the benefits went to the wealthiest Americans, and it didn't do anything about helping to jumpstart our economy. Now, when you take that plus a sharp increase in military spending, you see that we are in a situation where our economy is headed in the wrong direction, and we're not responding to the dreams of American people. So what I intend to do in this campaign is to make my #1 priority those aspirations of working men and women, and the concerns of people who don't have a job, and the concerns of people who don't have health care, and the concerns of people who are worried about their retirement security, and the concerns of people who want to make sure that government's on their side. I mean, I'm going to ask questions about why farmers in Iowa can't get help when they want to ban packer ownership of livestock, because that has everything to do with these big conglomerates using their power to push down prices. So farmers are having trouble surviving. Wherever you go in this economy, there are average, everyday, ordinary people who are having a tough time making ends meet. I'm their advocate. That's what I've done in the Congress of the United States. And it'll be interesting to see how people respond to a candidate who comes from the ranks and who intends to rise with the ranks.
You mentioned national health care. Do you think that's at all realistic in this country today? I know we've got 40 million people without it. But...
Well, those aren't just numbers. Mm-hmm. Those are mothers and fathers who can't take care of their own health so that they can be productive wage earners.
I mean, Clinton tried even the most basic beginnings of this and was shut down. I mean, do you honestly think that now 10 years later there is room in the political agenda for national health care?
Well, why do we have $1 trillion for war in Iraq, but we don't have money for health care? That's what I'm going to ask. I mean, when you think about it, why do we have $1 trillion for a tax cut for the rich, but we don't have money for national health care? Please. I mean, what is this about? Why have we let health care be managed by the insurance companies? They jack up the prices. People cannot get decent health care in this country. They can't afford decent health care. Even if they have insurance, they can't get the coverage they need to cover their health. I mean, this is a moral challenge to this country. And in this campaign, I'm going to make the attainment of Medicare for all or universal health care, whatever you want to call it, a fundamental part of the message of the campaign and a fundamental part of my mission to this country to raise up the standard of living for all Americans.
All right, let me ask you an ancillary question about health care. It has to do with your views on abortion, because some people have brought up the fact that possibly your voting record on abortion is not exactly 100% pro-choice, or whatever their litmus test is. How would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, there is a challenge being made right now to a woman's right to choose. And it's a challenge that, in effect, would make women second-class citizens. I intend, as a candidate, to support that right to choose and make that a strong statement of the view that I would take about the role of women in our society. Anyone who would try to undermine Roe v. Wade or support a Supreme Court that would do so, or appoint people to the Supreme Court that would do so, would not be working in the best interests of this country. Now, at the same time, my whole life has been dedicated to trying to affirm life. And what that means, that's the reason why I'm for peace, why I'm for protecting the environment, why I'm for workers' rights and safe workplaces, why I'm opposed to capital punishment. I try to do everything I can to have an ethic of life. At the same time, I think we have to have a society which respects the Constitution. And so, as a candidate, I feel that I have the opportunity to frame the question. As a member of Congress, I haven't had a chance to do that. We're given these narrow choices. We need to address all choices.
So we could say you're pro-choice.
You can say that I'm going, yes, you can say that, but you have to say more. Mm-hmm. Because what I want to say is that as a candidate for president, I want to elevate this debate so that we include all choices and not only affirm a woman's right to choose, but also broaden the debate so we look at how we can make abortions unnecessary. And how do we do that? Through birth control, through sex education, through abstinence education, through self-esteem classes for young women, through talking about the responsibilities of fatherhood to young men. But we have to go beyond that. We have to help support those women who determine they want to carry their pregnancy through the term with prenatal care and postnatal care and child care. This is all about taking a holistic approach. Fundamental to that is protecting the constitutional right of women to make the choice. We need, in this society, to give women the opportunity to make any choice they so desire.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the environment. I know you have a strong record with the Sierra Club and League of Conservation Voters. Do you see any conflict between, our need to have an expanding economy with also to protect the environment?
Well, no. I mean, actually, we've been living in an economy that has put tremendous unseen costs on consumers. I mean, think about the cost of fossil fuel energy production. Factor in that the cost of the war against Iraq. Think about the cost of nuclear fuel production. Factor in that the cost of trying to dispose of nuclear waste or store it safely, because you can't really dispose of it. We need to have sustainable energy policies. I know that Iowa's governor has taken a step in that direction through an initiative which would create a move towards wind energy. There are ways to develop sustainable energy which will make this country more secure and help the American people reduce the cost to their own households. Now, this is a long journey we're about to take here.
So I assume you're opposed to drilling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge.
Yes. And we have to protect the environment for future generations. environment isn't only an energy issue, it's a health issue as well. There are people across this country who suffer from air pollution, who suffer because their water quality isn't at the highest level, who suffer because they're living near landfills that should have been monitored more carefully, whose children are suffering because they still are playing in areas where they have lead-based paint or asbestos in buildings. So, you know, we have so much that we have to do. As a candidate, I intend to make the protection of the environment, as I have as a member of Congress, one of the hallmarks of my statement of candidacy.
And I assume that you know you have something in your platform about saving the family farm. That's a big issue here in Iowa, and in other parts of the country, we're losing huge numbers of farmers, as well as, you know, you talked about NAFTA earlier, the number of workers we're losing.
It's about corporate domination. I mean, corporations increasingly are setting the agenda in every aspect of our life, from healthcare to banking to insurance to agriculture. And we need leaders in Washington who are free from control by those corporate interests. Now, I can work with anyone, but I will tell you this. I know where I came from. I remember the experience of growing up in Cleveland, and where that experience has everything to do with the kind of president I'd be.
You know, do you think that you fall into what Senator Paul Wellstone called the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party?
I miss Paul. He was a dear friend. And this country misses his voice in the debate. What I hope to do is to remind people of the vision of Franklin Roosevelt and the great and the New Deal, the vision of John F. Kennedy and the new frontier, of LBJ and the Great Society. I mean, we have so much in our party that recommends itself to representing all the people, and that's the message I'm going to take out there in this campaign.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Kucinich. Tonight, we've been talking to Congressman Dennis Kucinich, who is co-chairman of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, who is about to launch a campaign for the presidency of the United States. Thank you for being with us, Congressman.
Thank you.